We're now pleased to be joined by Glenn Consor, of course, the radio analyst for the Washington Wizards, a member of the radio party, of which I'm so humbled to now be a part of as the sideline reporter. And Glenn, Bijan and I really wanted to talk to you about the NBA draft because Wizards fans may not realize this, but before you were serenading them over the airwaves, you actually worked as an NBA scout and for the Indiana Pacers, a team that's been in the news lately. And what I find interesting about your background as a scout is you were also a broadcaster at the time. And as I understand it, sometimes you would go to a game and work as a broadcaster and as a scout. So how would that work?
It's called double dipping, Chase and Bijan. That's what it's called. No, I mean, at the time, they knew where I was, and I gave the Pacers my schedule of broadcasting games, and they would say, hey, check this guy out, write up a report. Let me know what you think of these guys, on the games that I was broadcasting. So it kind of worked out pretty well. It was harder for me to do that while calling a game, quite frankly, but versus me just going to a game in the stands or, in the front row and observing players. But nonetheless, I was doing both at the time, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, led to your career in D.C., so for that we're grateful, Glenn. So let's transition to this year's draft. I think by all intents and purposes, the top two are set. It's going to be Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper. Then we get into that sort of tier 2, tier 3-ish of players where there's still a lot of talent out there, but we just don't know the orders. So I'm curious, as a former scout yourself, other than Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper, who are some guys who you really like? And where do you think they might end up going in this draft, and where might they fit?
It's really, I think this year's draft, first of all, is very similar to last year's draft, although I think the talent level, it appears to be higher. But guess what, guys? We don't know that yet. We won't know that until, 4 to 5 years from now, what players like Reece Sachet or, Bilal Coulibaly or Keyshawn George is going to look like, because they're so young. And that's the similarity to this year's draft. We're talking about, 30 to 45 guys that are 18, 19 years old. So do we really know how good they're going to be? We don't, because the upside's there for most of these kids. But, I like multi-skilled players. I think if you watch the NBA Finals now, and guys like Siakam and Shea and Jalen Williams, these guys do everything. Who's OKC's point guard now? Well, you could say Dort, you could say Shea. It doesn't matter. So guys are bringing the ball up. So I like multi-skilled guys. I mean, there's so many good players in this year's draft that can do those types of things. And some of them are not really, I would say, big names. But look at a guy like Derek Queen. Derek Queen reminds me a lot of Şengün from Houston. Someone who could handle the ball and pass, and great feel for the game. I like him. I'm intrigued by Fears because although he's so young, he attacks the rim so well. Questionable about his 3-point shot, but I've never been the type of scout that worries about, hey, this guy can't shoot now at 18, 19 years old, because I've seen that process change during the course of their career. So I like Fears. I like Malawatch from Duke also because of his bounce and his size. That guy's got I don't know what it is. What is it, like a 7'7" wingspan and 9'6" reach to the rim? So when he puts his hand up, he's 4 inches from the rim. And he's bouncy, a little bit like Derek Lively and those type guys. And no one talks about that guy in the draft. Why isn't anyone talking about him? He's got tremendous upside. Probably because of Duke's team with Knipple and Cooper Flagg, a better scorer than he looked at, I would say. So I like guys like that you really don't know how good they're going to be.
You bring up Kaman Malawatch. It's funny. I was there at the draft lottery, and when the Wizards got the 6th pick, I thought of the prospects they could take, and immediately I was like, well, they're not going to take Kaman Malawatch. They just drafted Alex Sarr. They just got a big man. But in the weeks that have transpired since, the more I watch him, the more I research him, and I watched him all year, the more it kind of makes sense that he could actually fit with Alex Sarr if the Wizards went that route. So How do you think Kaman Malawatch would fit on the Wizards if that's the pick that they make?
I think he'd fit beautifully because, like I said, what is Alex Sarr? What position does he play? I'll pose that to you guys. Is he a 4? Well, he's got some 3 skills in that 4 game, Chase, right, Bijan? He's that way. He can do multiple things. Can he play a little 2 and bring the ball up here at times? And, he's a shooter. Also, we've seen that he could shoot. So, and his game's going to evolve. So absolutely, these 2 guys can play together. And we don't really know the extent of what, Malawatch can do yet. But I think he's a lot better offensively than we think he is, because I think he can score inside and he could face and he can make some, mid-range shots. So, I think they can play together.
Glenn, we'll get back into the weeds on different specific players after this question, but I need to ask you, just as a former scout, sort of philosophically, is there one attribute that you really, really need and or love in a college prospect? Because I've talked to Chase about this before. I'm not a scout. I'm not even close to being a scout, but I love space creation. If a player can create space for himself to create shots or create space for his teammates, I think that's the single biggest thing that a prospect could have. But you have been in the NBA ranks as a scout, so from your perspective and your history in this job, what's one attribute that you think a college prospect needs to have?
Motor, period. I think you can't teach motor. I think you can improve your game if you have a motor, but if you come into the NBA with great motor, offensively and defensively, all the other skills will follow because you're going to work hard. I mean, look at a guy like TJ McConnell. I mean, come on, guys. Undrafted. And look at Siakam's motor. It's these guys. If you have that kind of motor, and quite frankly, I think that's one of the reasons Cooper Flagg is going to go 1, because it's not just his skill set. Is Cooper Flagg a floor spacer? Yes, he is, because he can take you off the bounce and he can make shots. But it's his motor that makes him special. So I like guys that, play with a great motor. Look at Shea. Shea's motor offensively, now it's not, he doesn't have a lot of wiggle in that motor and he doesn't have a lot of fanciness. He gets to his spots, but he is in a constant attack mode. Lou Dort, all these guys, I think you need to have that motor. And if it's of question coming into the draft, I think, someone's stock might drop.
TJ McConnell, it's so funny to me that he's only 6'1" and he's in his 10th NBA season. He's playing the NBA Finals, and he can't really shoot. You would think that a 6'1" point guard would be like a dead-eye three-point shooter or at least a great free throw shooter. He's below league average at both, and yet here he is because he does so many things so well and he's got a great motor, as you mentioned. Defense seems to be kind of hard to evaluate, right? There's less data on it. Efficiency tells its own story on the offensive end, but defensively, there just aren't as many numbers, and you really have to know what to look for because these guys are going to level up to such a significant degree once they get to the NBA level, and they have to try to stay in front of NBA athletes, which is just a completely different degree of athlete. What do you look for when you're trying to evaluate defense, and are there any players in this class that stand out to you on that end of the floor?
Yeah, I mean, lateral foot speed obviously is so important. But again, I bounce back to motor. Second effort, you get screened. What do you do after you get screened? You got to get yourself back into play, whether it's, finding the guy with the ball or helping out or being able to rotate to the weak side or strong side, depending on the pick and roll set. But to me, it's all about defensive motor. Why did the Pacers beat the Knicks? It was because of their on-ball pressure with multiple players, Nesmith and Nembhard. All those guys wore him down, and he still scored, but he was completely exhausted because of their motor. Think about those 2 players. We didn't really hear about them that much during the season. All of a sudden, they jumped off the chart. Those 2 guys defensively. I even like how Bub defends. Bub Carrington on defense. I mean, I think he has the potential because I like his motor on defense. And I think those types of guys are going to bring it. Now, from a standpoint of the draft, I mean, I think it's too hard to decide. I will tell you this: I like Dylan ability to defend. I really like him. And I like, obviously, Cooper Flagg's ability to defend multiple positions. I think big guys now and guards have to be able to learn to switch and defend guys either bigger or smaller. It's that simple. If you can't do it, you're not going to play, because the guys that are playing now in the NBA can do that. Even at TJ McConnell, man, that guy comes in and all of a sudden, the game changes because he can guard 5 guys. Look how Denver lost. They had multiple players defending Jokic in the low post, pushing him out, banging him. So I just think, I like the kid from Duke, the Malawatch. I like his ability to defend. I like big guys that can defend. I also like, there's so many good players in this draft. One guy that's intriguing to me is Noah Asangwe, who I think could be somebody who, is got great feel. He's 18 years old. I watched tape of him, and that guy's like Siakam. He could bounce around and defend, and he's athletic. And guys like that, even though their defense might be ahead of their offense, to me, guys like that could really surprise.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Asenge, Glenn, because my next question was going to be on the international players in this draft. And one of his teammates, actually, is Ben Saraf, who could also be in play for the Wizards at 18. There are a bunch of different guys in Europe who offer that kind of production. Other than Asenge, are there any international prospects who you're looking at specifically? And I guess in a larger sense, how good of an NBA preparer are these international leagues?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is that these guys come in ready. If you think about it, they come in ready. I don't know. I mean, there are some guys, but some of these guys have come from Europe, like what we're seeing, and played 1 year of college ball. And I think that's something that we're going to see a lot of. And Chase, you and I were talking about that earlier. But a guy like Nolan, how do you say his last name?
Traore.
He's 19, 6'3", point guard. He's really intriguing to me. And again, he comes from that French background. So I don't know, man. There's a lot. All of a sudden, France has become, Noah Penda. Someone like him, another guy who could be really good. But there's so many good players coming out of Europe. I want to bring up this one guy who intrigues me a lot. And that's Danny Wolf from Michigan, even though he's not European. Again, the skill set, like Derek Queen, someone who could play multiple positions. You question, everybody says when they talk about a guy like Danny Wolf and Queen, well, not athletic enough, not quick enough. I'm not buying it. I think with what their basketball acumens are and their IQ and their skill set of being able to pass, being able to be the guy with the ball on a pick and roll and be the guy setting the screen on a pick and roll. To me, that's very valuable in the NBA. Those two guys, to me, are very similar. And, Danny Wolf could be a sleeper in this thing.
Absolutely. Danny Wolf, very talented. And it'd be interesting if he does end up becoming a lottery pick or maybe even a top 10 pick, because he played 2 years at Yale before transferring to Michigan. Right. Not the typical path for an NBA lottery pick. But you mentioned sleep.
Neither was Duncan Robinson, though.
Yeah, no, that's true. Neither was Keyshawn George. You mentioned potential sleepers. The Wizards, we've been talking about the 6th pick. They've also got the 18th pick. They also have the 40th pick in the second round. Who are some guys that could go later in the draft that intrigue you? I know you mentioned Danny Wolf. Who else is on that list?
And again, I might be biased to players that might not be the greatest athletes in the world, but get it done. And you see it in the NBA. A guy like Johnny Broome from Auburn. They're saying he's not, he can't jump and this and that. The guy just rebounds, and to me, I think, is he going to go in the second round? Probably. But, he's someone that, could maybe surprise and give you some numbers coming off the bench, at least initially. I know he's a little bit older, but I don't know. I like his game.
Glenn, how much stock do you put into these players' age? Because one of my favorite players in this class, in that sort of tier, that I don't know what you call it, maybe tier 4, where the Wizards are picking around 18, is Walter Clayton Jr. of Florida, who lit it up in the tournament, won them the NCAA championship, essentially. Amazing shooter, amazing point guard. He's not given top 5, top 10 looks because of the fact that he's 22. So is their age sort of an end-all, be-all for these players, or does it not matter that much?
Good question. I think it might matter to some scouts and some organizations, but 22 is still young. 22, 15 years ago was young. So, look, I love Clayton. I think he is a sleeper in this thing. You talk about a guy that could score, not crazy athletic, not crazy quick, but he can score. Is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander crazy quick? No. He just gets to his spots. That's what this guy Clayton can do. And he's a good passer, and he did it on the big stage. So I love his game, Bijan. I agree with you, man. I think that guy could be a sleeper, a big sleeper in this draft, especially if he goes, in the second round, depending on where he goes. But you know what? Some team might say, you know what? I don't care what the other teams are saying. I'm picking him in the first round.
Of course, Bijan had to ask about Walter Clayton Jr. I'm hearing about him pretty much on a daily basis in our text thread. And I just want to say, hey, man, I'm a Maryland fan, all right? Yes, he's good, okay? I get it, all right? Yeah. But, Glenn, we got to ask you about Ace Bailey. I mean, he's in the news right now, tied to the Wizards. ESPN now has him projected to go to the Wizards at 6th overall. A lot of people didn't expect him to even be available at 6. It looks like he could be now. If the Wizards did pick Ace Bailey, how do you think he would fit?
I think he'd fit beautifully. Another one of these positionless players. He's kind of like Jabari Smith-ish a little bit. Someone that could, play multiple positions, defend multiple positions. He's very athletic, can shoot it. He's intriguing to me because I think he can shoot. So I mean, if he slips to 6, or slips past the first 3, 4. We talked about this before we went on this Zoom thing here. That would be a big surprise if anyone thought that he would go 6 to 10. 3 months ago, you'd be scratching your head. But because he's not working out for teams and he's proven what he can do, Look, Alex Sarr didn't want to work out for Atlanta, and the Wizards took him at 2, and was that the right move by Alex? It worked out for the Wizards. So this move by him not working out for teams is some team's going to benefit from it. And, again, upside. You guys asked me another quality, what makes a great draft pick. It's not just motor, but it's the intangibles. It's work ethic. Can you decipher when you're scouting a player what the player's work ethic and coachability is? That's hard to do. You got to do your due diligence. You got to talk to his high school coach and middle school coach and college coach and coach overseas, depending on where the player's coming from. If that player's got a phenomenal work ethic, they're going to get better. If it's questionable, then it's questionable that they're going to get better and improve. But it's all about motor and work ethic to me. And, and if Ace Bailey has those, qualities, which I think he does, because everything else is there, he could be, if he goes at 6, if he goes at 8, he's the steal of the draft, but if you don't have the motor and you don't have the work ethic, which I think he does. And I would be stunned if he dropped that low, but that's just me.
Speaking of motor and work ethic, Wizards fans, we got to note it. You're joining us from vacation. You're about to hit the golf course. You're doing your best Dave Johnson impression, right? Never stop working.
Right. No, look, you know what it is, guys? I wanted to talk to you two. That's all. This was personal. It's Bijan and Chase. You guys are my guys. And I do think you guys are doing a great job with anything. Bijan, I love working with you. During the Capital Classic, that was fun. Chase, obviously, on the sidelines with us, adding value that way. You guys do a great job, and this was a chance for me to. Dave and I will be hosting the draft party at MGM coming up. So It gives me some good time to do some prep work and get the pronunciations of these names right too. So I'm happy to be here with you guys.
And maybe hit the casino afterwards. Well,
I don't do those things, man. I'm too old. I'm too old for that stuff.
Well, Glenn, thanks for joining us. Thanks for dropping so much knowledge, and good luck on the Lynx.
Thank you very much. I will need it. I will definitely need it.
We'll see you soon, Glenn. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, guys.